Good afternoon from the European Medicines Agency and welcome to today's press briefing on the outcome of the EMA review on human papillomavirus vaccines, HPV vaccines. This review was carried out by the EMA Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, or PRAC. And today we have with us Dr. Enrica Alteri, the head of EMA's Human Medicines and Evaluation Division, and Dr. Fergus Sweeney, the head of Inspections and Human Medicines Pharmacovigilance at EMA. First, Dr. Alteri will present the recommendations from the PRAC on this topic, and then we will open the floor to questions. Probably we take a minute to remind all of you that if you want to ask a question, you need to link to your audio or telephone feed, otherwise it's not possible to ask a question. So you have also received the PRAC recommendation shortly before this briefing. And please note that this information is embargoed until 3:30 UK time today, meaning it is embargoed until 1.5 hours from now on. So, and we really would appreciate if you would not publish this information before the embargo has been lifted. Also, on one additional information, we are recording this press briefing and will upload it on the website soon after it ends. It will take about 45 minutes. And now we can start. Enrica, over to you.
Thank you, Marianne. Yes, my name is Enrica Alteri. I'm a medical doctor and I'm the head of the Human Medicine Evaluation here at the European Medicine Agency. And I'm pleased to be the first one to report to you the results of the review that the Pharmacovigilance and Risk Assessment Committee has just concluded. We can confirm today the safety of the HPV vaccines in relation to the two syndromes that have been evaluated, complex regional pain syndrome and postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or POTS. The PRAC has concluded a very detailed scientific review of the evidence surrounding the reports of POTS and CRPS in young women who have been vaccinated with human papillomavirus vaccines in order to protect them against cervical cancer and other cancers caused by HPV infection. The PRAC has concluded by consensus that the available evidence does not support a causal link between the vaccines and the development of CRPS or POTS. Therefore, in the PRAC view, there is no reason to change the way the vaccines are used or amend the current product information. The review, as I mentioned, has focused on two syndromes. The first one, complex regional pain syndrome, is characterized by chronic pain that affects one limb. The second, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or POTS, the heart rate of people affected can increase abnormally when they sit or stand up. They also can experience other symptoms such as dizziness, fatigue, and weakness, as well as headaches, aches and pains, and nausea. It is important to note that both CRPS and POTS occur in vaccinated as well as unvaccinated girls. The review has shown that the number of reports of CRPS and POTS after HPV vaccination is consistent with what one would expect to observe in the same age group, regardless of whether or not the people have been vaccinated. In this review, the PRAC saw no evidence that the overall rates of these syndromes in vaccinated girls were different from those expected in the same age group, even when taking into account possible underreporting. There is a need, therefore, to consider the vaccine in these events and these reports in the wider context of these vaccines. Over 80 million girls and young women have received this vaccine to protect them from cervical cancer and other cancer and precancerous conditions that are caused by HPV infection. Infection with human papillomavirus significantly increases the risk of cervical cancer and other similar cancers. Overall, HPV is responsible for approximately 5% of the global cancer disease burden. Nearly 100% of cervical cancers are caused by HPV infection. Cervical cancer is a serious health problem in Europe. It is the second most common cancer after breast cancer, affecting women aged 15 to 44. Every year, about 34,000 women are newly diagnosed with cervical cancer, and about 13,000 women will die of the disease, despite screening programs to try to identify the condition early on. It is important to stress, therefore, that the benefits of HPV vaccine outweigh their risks. As for all medicines, EMA continues to carefully monitor the safety of this vaccine. We acknowledge that the CRPS endpoints can severely affect the quality of life of a patient. EMA understands the difficulties faced by some young women who live with this condition, and it is important that they get the best treatment possible, as well as recognition. However, there is no evidence of a causal association between these syndromes and the vaccines that these girls have received. Speaking of which, it is important also to consider what is the evidence that the PRAC looked at. The committee reviewed the published research, data from clinical trials, reports of suspected side effects from patients, healthcare professionals, as well as data on CRPS endpoints supplied by the member states. It also consulted leading experts in the field from across the European Union. A number of patients groups also submitted detailed information that highlighted the impact that these syndromes can have on patients and their families. This information was also taken into account during the PRAC review. The PRAC recommendation is not the end of this review. It will be now passed to the Committee for Medicinal Products for Human Use, the CHMP, that will adopt the agency's final position. The evidence supporting the PRAC review will be published in an assessment report following the CHMP opinion 2 weeks from now. And this concludes my opening notes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Enrica. And we are now opening the floor to questions. If you want to ask a question, you need to click on the raise hand icon in the Adobe Connect menu bar, and then I'm calling your name, and we will then link you into the conversation, and I'm going to then ask you to introduce yourself, give your name and affiliation, and you can ask your question. So, do we already have any questions here? So far, I don't see any question yet, but then I would use the opportunity to give the floor to Dr. Fergus Sweeney to inform us a little bit about how EMA is actually monitoring the safety of vaccines across their life cycle.
Good afternoon, Fergus Sweeney here. I'm Head of Inspections and Human Medicines Pharmacovigilance. So for each medicinal product and therefore for each vaccine, our review of the safety begins with the submission of the initial marketing application, within which a substantial part of the data we receive is to establish the safety of the product. And this, at that stage, comes mostly from clinical trials and from experience in other parts of the world if the product has already been marketed in those regions, for instance, in the USA. Following the marketing authorization, as soon as the product is placed on the market, there is a responsibility on the marketing authorization holder to report to the agency, to our EUDRA system, adverse reactions which they may receive in information from healthcare professionals, from doctors, or from patients, or from the medical literature, and which they then enter into that database. And we constantly monitor that each month. We run analyses against that database to determine whether there are any new emerging signals. In addition, the companies have to prepare periodic safety update reports, which when products are first placed on the market are provided at close intervals to the agency, and these summarize not only the serious adverse reactions but also non-serious adverse reactions, information coming from further clinical trials or other studies which may have been conducted, and literature, and there they have to discuss the ongoing safety profile of the product, and we monitor that. And this is a constant process throughout the life cycle of the product. There are additional requirements if new emerging information becomes available which would question the positive benefit risk of the product, the companies are required to submit that immediately to us, and we will then assess that through our scientific committees through the PRAC, whose deliberations you have heard from today, and also through the CHMP. So there are multiple processes to ensure that we have a constant supervision of the safety of products. In addition, we carry out inspections of the pharmacovigilance systems of those companies to ensure that the procedures and processes they have in place are meeting the requirements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fergus. We still do not have any questions, so I'll use the time and opportunity to ask Enrica to tell us a bit more about how EMA involves patients in its work, and in particular in this HPV vaccine review.
Thank you, Marianne. Yes. We have patients at the center of all our activities, and this is not just words. We do pay tremendous attention to what the patients have to tell us in all the aspects of the development of medicines, from an early phase in which patients are actually heard to make us understand better the context of the disease where they live, all the way through the evaluation where the patients are heard within this scientific advisory groups and of course in the PRAC itself, to understand better the impact of both the disease and the potential adverse effects that they may have from the medicines used to treat or to address their conditions. In this particular case, we had multiple interactions with patients in writing, in person, here at the agency, and particularly during the review, we had patient representatives at the scientific advisory group that was used to glean and to really create the best conditions for the experts to put in front of the committees all the understanding and the expertise about these conditions that we possibly could get together in the European Union. Patient representatives participated to that discussion, and they contributed with their views and with their experiences. Of course, just as important, we always pay a lot of attention, and in fact is mandatory at this time, or is very encouraged at this time, for patients to report their potential adverse reaction to us directly, to their local authorities directly. This is has been promoted very seriously by the pharmacovigilance legislation that came into force in July 2012, and we now are pleased to know that the number of patient reports into the network, into the European network of pharmacovigilance, has increased substantially. So we are in the position now to really have a clearer or a broader understanding of what the concerns of the patients are, without necessarily the intermediates of the healthcare professional. To us, this is very important because the patients are the users of the medicines and those who need to tell us, to make us understand, and our experts understand the relationship between the medicines and what they experience.
Thank you very much, Enrica. As we still do not have any questions, I assume that the issues are clear. Oh, now we have one. Great. So it's going to be Mr. Findalen. Just a second until we can link you up.
Hello, my name is Jeppe Findalen. I'm a Danish journalist. I have a question for Enrica Altari. Can you hear me? All right, yeah.
Yes, all is fine. Yes.
Yes, I would like to ask, how can you rule out the suspicion that it can cause CRPS and POTS, since none of the large studies, to my knowledge, have been looking at this very issue?
I think the job is very difficult indeed. It is very much the responsibility of the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee to conduct this review. And what they did, they looked at enormous amount of available evidence. So what you do in these cases is do not limit yourself to one or another study, recognizing that each of them and individual reports may have their limitations. So the robustness of the process that we have put in place here relies on the completeness and the robustness of the assessment, because it does take into account all the possible information. I give you a small example of that. Because of the diagnosis of POTS, for example, is actually rather difficult. We did conduct, we paid a lot of attention to a number of symptoms that may have been reported, although they were not called POTS, for example. But we did take into account situations or reports where one or two associated symptoms could have been brought to our attention. So usually the exclusion or confirmation of a causal link is done on that totality of the evidence and not on an individual study. In this case, the committee was, by consensus, very convinced that the totality of the evidence was extremely reassuring in ruling out a causal association.
Thank you very much, Enrica. So we don't have any more questions. If you do not want to raise your hand, I would like to thank everyone. Oh, okay, we have one more. No? There is no, obviously the person who tried to connect with us doesn't have a telephone link, so they need to link up to their Adobe Connect or their telephone to ask a question. So please do this now. Otherwise, there's still no connection, so we cannot take that question. Okay, there's another question from Mr. Findalen. So let's go ahead.
Yeah, thank you once again. Yeah, thank you again.
Okay, you can go ahead.
Thanks. Why don't you see the necessity of a new study on this issue? Because as far as I hear you, you have been gathering together information and statements from different experts, but none of them have been doing the large study on all the reports and all the links that people are trying to make around Europe. But as you said, there are many different ways to interpret what is POTS, what is CRPS. So might that not just show that a specific study on this issue is important?
Please, Fergus.
So the PRAC has considered this matter, and as Enrica explained, they have already looked at a wide range of data, some of it coming from clinical trials, obviously a lot of it coming from the adverse reaction reports which the agency has received, and also information we've received directly from the concerned patients and patient groups. Looking at that totality of information at present, and given that the analysis of the PRAC shows that there is no signal and difference between the occurrence and prevalence of POTS and CRPS in the general population compared to those who have received vaccines, it's not considered that it would be useful at this stage to conduct such a study. However, as I explained earlier, the whole process of pharmacovigilance is one of constant vigilance, constant alertness, and constantly looking and reassessing at the information that we receive. Therefore, we will be continuing to monitor these issues as well as other issues which affect the safety of these vaccines. We can always revisit that should further information become available that indicates that the current conclusions may need to be changed. But at present, it's considered that a new extensive study at this stage isn't necessary.
Thank you very much, Fergus. And now the person who tried to link up is obviously linked in, but please state your name and your affiliation.
I'm Emma Yu. Hello, I'm Emma Yule. I'm a British journalist. To follow on from the previous question, I wanted to ask, what was the data that you used in terms of assessing what the occurrence and prevalence rates of POTS and CRPS are in the population? I've spoken to POTS experts who said themselves that this data isn't tracked and have been unable to get that from the British authorities. I just wondered how you're assessing what the standard rate is.
Rika, please. Can you respond to that one?
Yes. So first of all, let me refer to you, inform you that the full CHMP report will be published in 2 weeks from now. So the entirety of the evidence considered and also the reasoning about it will be completely made public. And I think this should be reassuring for all of those who are interested in the robustness of the conclusion. So this is, to me, is the most important message to give. But to get to your question, I think what you're saying has been recognized by the PRAC review, and the way to mitigate this concern is actually to be rather more conservative and utilize in your definitions of cases and as well as of controls, if you allow me to speak a little bit more technical, to consider a wider range of symptoms and signs that may be strictly attributed to a syndrome as such. So in that respect, I think we are very confident that this evaluation has been very thorough because it was so comprehensive in the way the cases even were defined. And I can tell you that the diagnosis of POTS in itself is quite difficult. So we were not attaching too much importance to a very strict definition of POTS per se as an expert or a specialist would give. So we did consider in our review all those cases that, although they were reported as POTS, they may not have been POTS because the diagnosis was not necessarily made by a specialist. So in that respect, I think we have been extremely careful and extremely complete in our way of reviewing and even including the evidence in our report. But all the details will be present in the report in 2 weeks.
Thank you very much, Enrica. So we have a follow-up question from Mrs. Yu. Can you please also tell us for which journal you work?
I work for Arch newspapers based in London. Thank you, Enrica. Just to follow on from that, some of the parents that I've spoken to of girls with these conditions are concerned that some of the clinical studies do not include data because of the length to diagnosis and had called for symptom clusters to be considered rather than diagnosis, which it sounds like you have done. Did you take any account of the fact that some of the clinical studies would only look at diagnosis 6 months from the vaccine, whereas I think 2 years is usually the shortest time that it takes to get a diagnosis for POTS or CRPS?
Yes, we did.
Thank you. So any more questions? Please raise your hand. Otherwise, I would like to close this press briefing. Thank you very much for attending, to both the journalists online, but also our speakers today. And please be reminded of the embargo of the information. So it's going to be in about 1 hour that the embargo is lifted, and please hold off until then. If you have any further question, you can contact our press office as usual. And thank you very much, and bye-bye.